The moment I saw the extension cord snaking through the snow from my backup generator to Linda Pemberton's house, 3 doors down, I knew my peaceful Tuesday was about to become a nightmare. I stood at my kitchen window, coffee mug halfway to my lips, watching the orange cord disappear into the white blanket covering our subdivision in Denver, Colorado. The blizzard had knocked out power to our entire neighborhood 12 hours ago, and according to the news, we wouldn't see electricity restored for at least 3 more days. My generator was the only thing keeping my pipes from freezing and my food from spoiling. The problem was, I hadn't given Linda Pemberton, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, permission to tap into my generator. In fact, I specifically remembered her standing in my driveway 2 months ago, clipboard in hand, informing me that my generator violated HOA aesthetic guidelines and needed to be removed from view. I set down my mug and pulled on my winter coat. The temperature outside had dropped to -15 degrees, and the wind chill made it feel even worse. This was the kind of Colorado winter storm that made national news, the kind that shut down highways and left people stranded. My generator, a commercial-grade unit I'd installed last year after getting tired of power outages, was my lifeline. And apparently, it had become Linda's lifeline too. The snow crunched under my boots as I followed the cord. My breath created clouds in the frigid air, and my face stung from the cold. The cord ran along the fence line between my property and my neighbor Greg's house, then cut across the street. It was thick, industrial-grade wire, the kind that could handle serious electrical load. She hadn't just borrowed a little power. She'd planned this. I reached Linda's front door and knocked hard. Through the window, I could see lights on inside. Not just a few emergency lights, but every lamp in her living room blazing. I could hear the hum of what sounded like a space heater, maybe 2. Linda opened the door wearing a plush bathrobe and fuzzy slippers. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she held a steaming mug of what smelled like hot chocolate. The warmth from inside her house hit me like a wall. "Quinn," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What brings you out in this terrible weather?" "You know exactly what brings me out here," I said, pointing down at the extension cord that ran under her door. "You hooked into my generator without asking." She took a sip of her hot chocolate. "Oh, that. Well, Quinn, I assumed you'd be neighborly about it. After all, we're in a crisis situation. The HOA bylaws clearly state that residents should support each other during emergencies." "The HOA bylaws don't give you permission to steal my electricity," I said. "That generator is running on fuel that I paid for, powering equipment that I bought. You need to unplug right now." Linda's expression hardened. "I'm the HOA president, Quinn. I have 3 space heaters running to keep my pipes from freezing. My fish tank needs power, or my koi will die. They're worth over $5,000. Surely you can spare a little electricity for a neighbor in need." "You told me 2 months ago that my generator violated aesthetic guidelines," I said. "You threatened to fine me $500 if I didn't relocate it. Now you're using it." "That's completely different," Linda said. "The aesthetic concerns are still valid, but this is an emergency. I'll be happy to revisit the violation once the power comes back on. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm letting all the warm air out." She started to close the door, but I put my boot in the way. "Linda, I'm going to say this once. Unplug from my generator or I'll unplug you myself." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me? Because I can call the police for that." "On what phone?" I asked. "The cell towers are overloaded and your landline doesn't work without power. Go ahead and try." "You're being incredibly selfish," Linda said. "The HOA board will hear about this. There will be consequences." I turned and walked back toward my house, following the orange cord through the snow. I heard Linda's door slam behind me. When I reached my property line, I examined the connection. She'd used a heavy-duty adapter to tap directly into the secondary outlet on my generator. It was a professional setup, which meant she'd either done her research or hired someone to do this. I unplugged her cord and wrapped it around my hand. The generator's load immediately decreased, the engine note changing as it adjusted to the reduced demand. I walked back to Linda's house and dumped the coiled cord on her front steps, then returned home. My house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch I'd bought 5 years ago when I moved to Denver for work. I was a software engineer for a medical device company, and I worked from home most of the time. The generator had been a practical investment, one that paid for itself every time the power went out. Colorado winters could be unpredictable, and I liked being prepared. I made myself another cup of coffee and settled into my home office. Through the window, I watched Linda's house. The lights stayed on for about 30 seconds after I'd unplugged her, probably running on residual power from her devices. Then everything went dark. 20 minutes later, there was a pounding on my front door. I opened it to find Linda standing there with 2 other people I recognized from the neighborhood. Marcus Chen, the HOA vice president, and Deborah Walsh, the HOA treasurer. All 3 of them looked angry. "Quinn Kellerman," Linda said formally. "We're here on official HOA business. You've violated Section 12 of the community bylaws, which requires residents to assist neighbors during emergencies." "Show me where it says I have to provide free electricity," I said. Marcus stepped forward. He was in his 50s, a retired accountant who took HOA rules more seriously than the tax code. "The spirit of the bylaw is clear. We're in the middle of a blizzard. People need help." "Then help them with your own resources," I said. "I didn't see any cords running from your houses." "Why aren't you sharing your power?" "We don't have generators," Deborah said. She was shivering despite her heavy coat. "You're the only one who does." "That's not my problem," I said. "I invested in emergency preparedness. You chose not to. That doesn't entitle you to take what's mine." Linda pulled out her phone. "I'm documenting this refusal to cooperate. The HOA has the authority to levy fines for violations. You're looking at $500 per day until you comply. You're going to fine me for not letting you steal from me," I said. "Good luck with that." "It's not stealing if it's mandated by community guidelines," Linda said. "We'll be calling an emergency board meeting. You'll receive formal notice of your violations and the associated penalties." She turned and marched back toward her house, with Marcus and Deborah following. I watched them go, then closed the door. This was exactly the kind of petty nonsense I'd worried about when I moved into an HOA neighborhood. But the location had been perfect, the price was right, and I'd convinced myself that I could deal with whatever bureaucratic nonsense came up. I spent the rest of the morning working, trying to focus on the code I was writing for a new patient monitoring system. The generator hummed steadily outside, keeping my house warm and my computers running. Around noon, I took a break and checked the weather forecast. The blizzard was expected to continue through the night, with another 12 to 18 inches of snow predicted. The power company had updated their estimate, saying it might be 4 or 5 days before electricity was restored to our area. That afternoon, I heard a noise outside. I looked out to see Linda attempting to connect another extension cord to my generator. She was bundled up in a heavy parka, struggling with the connection in the deep snow. I pulled on my boots and coat and went outside. "What are you doing?" Linda jumped, dropping the cord. "This is harassment, Quinn. You're targeting me specifically because I'm the HOA president." "I'm protecting my property," I said. That's not harassment. I need power, Linda said. Her voice cracked slightly. My house is getting cold. I have nowhere else to go. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the 3-page letter she'd sent me about my mailbox being the wrong shade of black, and the fine she'd threatened when my grass was half an inch taller than HOA regulations allowed. You have the same options everyone else has, I said. Go to a shelter, stay with family, check into a hotel outside the affected area. The roads are closed, Linda said. Haven't you been watching the news? Nobody can get in or out of the neighborhood. We're trapped here. She was right about that. I'd seen the reports of jackknifed semis on I-25 and whiteout conditions on all the major roads. The governor had declared a state of emergency and ordered everyone to stay home. Then you'd better bundle up, I said. Use your fireplace if you have one. Blankets. Layers. That's what people did before electricity. I have an electric fireplace, Linda said quietly. It's decorative. Not my problem, I said. I went back inside, but I couldn't focus on work anymore. I kept thinking about Linda in her cold house. Then I'd remember her standing in my driveway, threatening me with fines over the generator placement, over my mailbox, over every tiny thing she could find to complain about. She'd made my life miserable for months. Now she wanted my help. Evening came, and the temperature dropped further. My generator was working hard, cycling on and off to maintain the heat in my house. I'd filled it with fuel that morning, but I'd need to refuel again tomorrow. I had about 30 gallons stored in my garage, enough for maybe a week if I was careful. Around 8 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Greg Bannister, my next-door neighbor. Greg was a firefighter, a good guy who'd never been involved in HOA politics. He looked worried. "Hey, Quinn," he said. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure, come in." Greg stepped inside and brushed snow off his jacket. "Look, I know you're having issues with Linda and the HOA. I don't want to get in the middle of that, but I'm worried about some of the older residents on the block. Mrs. Patterson is 83. The Johnsons both have health problems. It's getting really cold in these houses." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I was thinking," Greg said. "What if we set up a sort of warming rotation? People could come to your house for a few hours, warm up, charge their phones, maybe heat some food. Not Linda," he added quickly. "I know you two have history. But the vulnerable people. The ones who really need help." I thought about it. "How many people are we talking about?" "Maybe a dozen," Greg said. "I've been checking on people. Most folks are okay, but there are some who are really struggling." I nodded slowly. "Okay, but there are rules. Limited time slots so my generator doesn't get overloaded. No one brings Linda or tries to negotiate on her behalf. And once the power's back on, I don't want to hear a single word about HOA violations." "Fair enough," Greg said. "I'll spread the word." Over the next hour, neighbors started arriving. Mrs. Patterson came first, helped by her grandson. She sat in my living room, wrapped in blankets, drinking hot tea. The Johnsons came next, both of them looking pale and shaken from the cold. I set up a rotation system, letting people stay for 2 hours to warm up before sending them back home with hot water bottles and advice on staying warm. None of them were Linda. Around 10 p.m., someone knocked urgently on my door. I opened it to find Marcus Chen again, but this time he looked genuinely distressed. "Quinn, I need your help," he said. "I know we got off on the wrong foot earlier, but this is serious. Linda passed out. I think it's hypothermia." I grabbed my coat. "Where is she?" "Her house." I went to check on her and found her collapsed in the kitchen. I followed Marcus through the snow to Linda's house. He'd left the door open, and I could see my breath inside. It was barely warmer than outside. Linda was lying on the kitchen floor, conscious but shivering violently. Her lips had a bluish tint, How long has she been like this? I asked. I don't know, Marcus said. I just found her 10 minutes ago. I knelt beside Linda. Her eyes focused on me with difficulty. Quinn, she whispered. Don't talk, I said. Marcus, help me get her up. We need to get her somewhere warm. Between the two of us, we half carried Linda out of her house and through the snow to mine. Greg saw us coming and opened the door. We brought Linda into my living room and laid her on the couch. I grabbed every blanket I had and piled them on top of her. Someone make hot water, I said. Not too hot, we need to warm her up gradually. Mrs. Patterson, who was still in my living room, moved into action. I was a nurse for 40 years, she said. Let me help. Together we worked on Linda. Mrs. Patterson checked her vital signs and helped her sip warm water. Slowly, the violent shivering decreased. Color started returning to Linda's face. After about 30 minutes, her eyes cleared and focused properly. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, I said. We're going to have a conversation once you're stable. It took another hour before Linda was coherent enough to sit up. Mrs. Patterson had gone home and most of the other neighbors had left. It was just me, Linda, Greg, and Marcus. What were you thinking? I asked Linda. You could have died. I was thinking about my koi fish, Linda said, and my house. I was trying to keep everything running and I didn't realize how cold I was getting. The fish aren't worth your life, Greg said, Linda's eyes filled with tears. I know that now, I couldn't admit that I needed help. Not from Quinn, not after everything I've done. Yeah, about that, I said. Let's talk about the HOA violations, all of them. Every stupid fine, every ridiculous complaint, every time you've made my life difficult over things that don't matter. Linda looked down at her hands. I was wrong, she said quietly. I know I was. The HOA gave me a sense of power, of control. I got carried away. I made everything about rules and regulations instead of about people actually living their lives. You threatened to fine me for having a generator that could have saved your life, I said. Do you see the irony there? I see it, Linda said. I see all of it, and I'm sorry, truly sorry. Marcus cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Quinn, I think a lot of us on the board got caught up in the power trip. We need to do better. Here's what's going to happen, I said. Linda, you can stay here until the power comes back on, but we're going to establish some ground rules for the HOA going forward. Reasonable regulations only. No more petty fines over aesthetic nonsense. No more harassment over minor violations. Can you agree to that? Linda nodded. I can do more than agree. I'll step down as president if that's what people want. We'll let the residents decide that, I said. But first, let's get through this blizzard. The next morning, I woke to find Linda asleep on my couch, still wrapped in blankets. The storm was still raging outside, but the news said it was finally starting to weaken. Another day, maybe two, and the roads would be passable. I made coffee and checked my generator. The fuel level was lower than I'd like, but I had enough to get through another couple of days. I was refilling the tank from one of my storage cans when I heard raised voices from inside the house. I went back in to find Deborah Walsh standing in my living room, pointing at Linda. You have to be kidding me, Deborah was saying. She's been giving everyone grief about Quinn's generator, and now she's camping out in his house using that same generator. Deborah, Linda said tiredly. I almost died from hypothermia last night. Quinn saved my life. I think we can set aside the HOA drama for a minute. No, Deborah said. No, we can't. Because this is exactly the problem. You make rules for everyone else, but they don't apply to you. You know what? I'm done. I'm resigning from the board. Wait, Marcus said. He'd apparently come in with Deborah. Let's not make any hasty decisions. It's not hasty, Deborah said. I've been thinking about this for months. The HOA has become toxic. We spend more time arguing about paint colors and mailbox heights than actually building community. I'm out." She turned and left, slamming the door behind her. Marcus looked at Linda and me. "She's not wrong," he said. "We've lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to be." "What's it supposed to be?" I asked. "A way for neighbors to maintain property values and resolve disputes," Marcus said. "Not a power structure for enforcing arbitrary rules. I think I need to resign too." "Don't," Linda said. "Marcus, if you really want to fix this, stay on the board. Help me make changes. Or help whoever replaces me." Over the next several hours, more neighbors stopped by. Some came to warm up, others to charge phones or get hot food. My house became an unofficial community center. People shared food, stories, and complaints about the HOA. It became clear that Linda wasn't the only problem. The entire structure had become corrupted by petty power plays and rigid enforcement of minor rules. By the evening of the second day, the storm had passed. The snow had stopped, and road crews were beginning to clear the main highways. The power company updated their estimate, saying most areas would have electricity restored within 24 hours. Linda was sitting in my kitchen, drinking tea. She looked better, though still tired. "I owe you more than an apology," she said. "I owe you compensation for the generator fuel, for the food, for everything." "I don't want your money," I said. "I want real change in the HOA." "You'll get it," Linda said. "I'm calling an emergency general meeting once the power's back. We're going to revise the bylaws, remove the ridiculous restrictions, and refocus on actual community building." "I'll believe it when I see it," I said. The power came back on the next afternoon. The lights flickered, then held steady. All over the neighborhood, I could hear cheers and applause. My generator automatically shut off when it detected grid power returning. I went outside to perform maintenance on it, checking the oil and draining the remaining fuel into storage containers. Linda had gone back to her house that morning. I'd walked over with her to make sure everything was okay. Her pipes had survived, though her koi fish hadn't. She'd stood looking at the tank, tears running down her face, then turned to me and said, "They were just fish. I'm alive because of you." 2 days later, I received a notice about an emergency HOA meeting. It was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at the community center. The agenda listed 3 items: revision of aesthetic guidelines, review of enforcement procedures, and election of new board members. I showed up expecting maybe 20 people. Instead, the community center was packed. Every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls. Linda stood at the front of the room, looking nervous. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "I know these past few days have been difficult for everyone. I want to address what happened during the blizzard, specifically my actions regarding Quinn Kellerman's generator." The room went quiet. Linda took a deep breath. "I acted inappropriately. I took power from his generator without permission. When he rightfully cut me off, I tried to use HOA authority to force him to give me access. I was wrong. What's more, my wrong actions were part of a larger pattern of overly strict enforcement and petty rule application that has made this HOA a source of stress rather than community support." Someone in the back called out, "So what are you going to do about it?" "I'm proposing we completely revise our bylaws," Linda said. "I've drafted new guidelines that focus on legitimate community concerns like safety and property maintenance, while eliminating purely aesthetic requirements. I'm also proposing that all fines from the past year be reviewed and potentially refunded if they were for minor violations." That got people's attention. I saw heads nodding around the room. "Additionally," Linda continued, "I'm stepping down as HOA president, effective immediately. I'll stay on as a regular board member if people want, but I think we need new leadership. Marcus stood up. I'd like to nominate Quinn Kellerman for president. I nearly choked. What? No. I don't want to be HOA president. You kept people safe during the crisis, Marcus said. You showed what real community leadership looks like. You'd be perfect. I have a full-time job, I protested. I don't have time to run the HOA. The position doesn't require much time if we're not constantly enforcing petty rules, Linda said. Think about it. You could help shape what this community becomes. I looked around the room. People were watching me expectantly. Greg gave me an encouraging nod. Even Deborah, who'd resigned from the board, looked hopeful. Fine, I said, but only if we make real changes. No more harassment over minor issues. No more surprise violations. Transparent processes, reasonable rules, actual community building. The vote was unanimous. I was elected HOA president with Greg as vice president and a woman named Sarah Chen, Marcus's daughter, as treasurer. We spent the next 3 hours going through the bylaws line by line, cutting out ridiculous restrictions and rewriting enforcement procedures. By the end of the meeting, we'd created something that actually looked reasonable. The new bylaws required mediation before fines, limited aesthetic rules to major issues like structural maintenance, and established community improvement funds for things like neighborhood beautification projects. Linda approached me after the meeting. Thank you, she said, for saving my life and for giving me a chance to make things right. Just don't steal my electricity again, I said. She laughed. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh genuinely. I bought my own generator, had it delivered yesterday, nowhere near as nice as yours, but it'll do. Make sure you get the right permits, I said with a slight grin. Already filed them, Linda said. I'm learning. The following weeks were busy. Word spread about what had happened during the blizzard and the changes to our HOA. I started getting calls from other neighborhood associations asking for advice on reforming their own bylaws. A local news station even did a story on us, framing it as Colorado Neighborhood Transforms HOA After Blizzard Crisis. The story attracted more attention than I expected. The segment showed footage of my generator, interviewed several neighbors about the warming center I'd run during the storm, and featured Linda talking candidly about her mistakes as HOA president. The reporter, a sharp woman named Jessica Torres, had a talent for finding the human interest angle. What made you open your home to neighbors? She asked me during the interview. It was the right thing to do, I said. People needed help. I had resources. It wasn't complicated. But you initially refused to help Linda Pemberton, the former HOA president, Jessica said. Can you explain that? I'd known this question was coming. Linda and I had a difficult relationship because of HOA issues. When she took power from my generator without permission, I saw it as a continuation of that pattern. But when I learned she was in real danger, personal grievances didn't matter anymore. You help people in crisis, period. The story aired on a Friday evening. By Saturday morning, I was getting calls from journalists in other states asking about HOA reform and community resilience. It was overwhelming. I started referring people to Linda, figuring she could handle the media attention better than I could. She rose to the occasion. Linda appeared on a Denver morning show, talking about the lessons she'd learned about leadership and community. She was honest about her mistakes, articulate about the changes we'd made, and compelling in her vision for what HOAs could become. We forgot that we're neighbors first, homeowners second, and HOA members a distant third, Linda said on the show. The crisis reminded us what really matters. Now we're building systems that reflect those priorities. The attention eventually died down, but the changes stuck. Our neighborhood started doing monthly community dinners. We organized a tool sharing program so people didn't need to buy equipment they'd rarely use. We created a neighborhood assistance fund for residents who hit hard times. Most importantly, the atmosphere changed. People stopped being afraid of random violations. They started actually talking to each other instead of sending formal complaint letters. The HOA became what it was supposed to be, a way to coordinate community needs, not a weapon for enforcing conformity. About 2 months after the blizzard, I was working in my yard when Linda walked over. She'd been keeping a low profile since stepping down as president, focusing on her job as a real estate agent and rebuilding relationships with neighbors. "Quinn, do you have a minute?" she asked. "Sure, what's up?" "I wanted to show you something." She handed me a folder. Inside were financial records showing that the HOA had refunded over $30,000 in what we determined were unjust fines from the previous year. We went through every penalty from the past 18 months. Anything that was purely aesthetic or overly petty got refunded. "How many people got money back?" I asked. 43 households, Linda said. "Including you, there's a check for $1,500 in there." I flipped through the pages and found the check. It covered the fines I'd received for my generator placement, my mailbox color, and a violation for having Christmas lights up 3 days past the HOA deadline. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "Yes, I did," Linda said. "It was wrong to charge those fines in the first place." "This is part of making it right," she hesitated, then continued. "I also wanted to tell you that I'm moving. I got a job offer in Boulder. Better pay, new start. I think it's time." "When do you leave?" I asked. "End of the month. I've already listed my house." "There's interest from a nice young couple with 2 kids. I think they'll fit in well here." "Good luck, Linda," I said, and I meant it. "Thank you, Quinn, for everything. You could have let me freeze to death. No one would have blamed you given our history, but you didn't. You saved my life and you gave me a chance to fix my mistakes. I won't forget that." She walked back to her house. I watched her go, thinking about how much had changed in just a few months. A blizzard had shut down our neighborhood, exposed the flaws in our HOA system, and somehow brought people together in the process. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Greg asking if I could help him install a backup generator at his house. Apparently, the blizzard had convinced several neighbors that emergency preparedness was worthwhile. I was becoming the neighborhood generator expert, which was ironic given how much trouble mine had caused initially. As I typed a response, I thought about Linda's koi fish, the ones she'd been so desperate to save. They'd died during the cold, but she'd survived. Priorities had a way of clarifying themselves in a crisis. We'd all learned that lesson, some of us harder than others. The rest of the spring passed uneventfully. We held regular HOA meetings, but they were short and focused on actual issues. Coordinating neighborhood cleanup days, approving reasonable requests for home improvements, managing the community budget. No drama, no power plays, just neighbors working together. Summer arrived, bringing warm weather and afternoon thunderstorms. My generator sat quietly beside my house, ready for the next emergency but no longer a source of conflict. I'd even received compliments from new neighbors who appreciated that someone in the area had serious backup power capabilities. One evening in July, I was grilling burgers in my backyard when Greg came over with his wife and kids. We'd become close friends since the blizzard, and his family often joined me for informal dinners. "Did you hear?" Greg said as he grabbed a beer from my cooler. "Linda sold her house. The new family moves in next week." "She mentioned she was leaving," I said. "Hope the new neighbors are good people." "From what I heard, they're very laid back," Greg's wife Amy said. "The husband is a teacher, the wife is a nurse. 2 kids, both elementary school age. They were excited about the community atmosphere here. Good, I said. That's what we need. People who want to be part of a neighborhood, not just rule followers or rule enforcers. As the sun set and we ate dinner outside, I reflected on how different everything felt compared to 6 months ago. Back then, I'd been constantly stressed about HOA violations, always watching for the next complaint or fine. Now I actually enjoyed living here. My neighbors were friends, not adversaries. The HOA served the community instead of policing it. The following week, I met the new neighbors. Brian and Helen Foster were in their early 30s, friendly and enthusiastic about their new home. Their kids, Emma and Jack, were 7 and 9. Brian taught science at a middle school and Helen worked as an ER nurse at Denver Health. "We heard about what happened during the blizzard," Helen said when I introduced myself. "The story about your generator and how the neighborhood pulled together. It's one of the reasons we wanted to move here. That sense of community is hard to find." "It wasn't always like this," I admitted. "We had to learn some hard lessons, but I think we're in a good place now." Over the next few weeks, I helped the Fosters settle in. I showed Brian my generator setup, explaining the maintenance requirements and fuel storage. He was fascinated by the technical aspects and asked detailed questions about power management during emergencies. "I teach engineering concepts to kids," Brian said. "This is exactly the kind of practical application that makes the subject real." "Mind if I bring some students by sometime for an educational visit?" "Sure," I said, "as long as their parents are okay with it." That fall, Brian organized a neighborhood preparedness workshop. We covered everything from backup power to food storage to emergency communication plans. About 30 families attended, including several from neighboring developments who'd heard about our program. The local fire department sent representatives who taught CPR and basic first aid. The police department discussed emergency protocols. The County Emergency Management Office provided information about disaster resources. It turned into a comprehensive community resilience program, all sparked by one winter storm and a dispute over a generator. In November, Colorado experienced another major snowstorm. This time, everyone was prepared. Multiple houses had backup generators. We'd established a community communication tree using text messaging. We'd identified vulnerable residents who might need extra help. We'd stockpiled supplies at the community center. The power went out again, but this time there was no panic. Neighbors checked on each other. People with generators shared power through organized rotation schedules. The community center became a warming station, staffed by volunteers. It was everything that should have happened during the first storm, but didn't because we'd been too focused on rules and grievances. My generator ran smoothly, powering my house and providing backup for 2 elderly neighbors who needed electricity for medical equipment. No one stole power. No one complained about violations. We worked together, and we made it through the storm without incident. When the power came back on after 2 days, Greg organized an impromptu celebration at the community center. People brought food and drinks, and we spent the evening sharing stories and congratulating ourselves on handling the crisis so well. "Remember last year," Amy said, laughing, "when Linda was threatening to fine Quinn while simultaneously trying to steal his electricity? What a mess that was." "It was a necessary mess," I said. "We needed that crisis to figure out what really mattered. Without it, we'd probably still be fighting about mailbox colors." "Have you heard from Linda?" Brian asked. "She sends emails occasionally," I said. "She's doing well in Boulder. Working with a progressive HOA that focuses on community building rather than rule enforcement." I think she found her place. As the party wound down and people started heading home, I stood outside the community center looking at the snow-covered neighborhood. The houses glowed with electric light, warm and comfortable. My generator was quiet, stored safely in my garage until the next emergency. I thought about the journey from that first morning when I'd seen the orange extension cord snaking through the snow. Everything had changed because of that moment. A petty dispute had escalated into a life-threatening situation, which had forced us all to confront our priorities and rebuild our community from the ground up. It wasn't the story I'd expected when I moved to Meadowbrook Estates. I thought I was just buying a house in a nice neighborhood with decent schools and reasonable property values. Instead, I'd found myself at the center of a community transformation, reluctantly serving as HOA president, and somehow becoming friends with the woman who'd once been my worst enemy. Life was strange that way. The things you resisted often turned out to be exactly what you needed. The conflicts you tried to avoid became opportunities for growth. The people you clashed with sometimes became your strongest allies. As I drove home that night, I passed Linda's old house. The Fosters had decorated for the holidays, with tasteful lights outlining the roofline and a wreath on the door. It looked welcoming and warm. The new family had brought positive energy to that space, replacing the rigid control with genuine hospitality. My own house was dark when I arrived, just the porch light illuminating the front steps. I parked in the garage next to my generator and went inside. The house was warm, the refrigerator hummed quietly, and everything was exactly as it should be. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in my living room, the same room where I'd treated Linda for hypothermia almost a year ago. The couch where she'd lain wrapped in blankets still sat against the wall. I'd never told anyone, but I'd replaced those blankets afterward, unable to use them without remembering that night. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Just heard about the storm. Glad everyone was prepared this time. You built something good there, Quinn. I'm proud of what we all accomplished. I typed back a response. We all did it together. Hope you're doing well. Her reply came quickly. Better than ever. Thank you for giving me a second chance. I set down my phone and finished my drink. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet under its blanket of snow. Tomorrow would bring the work of clearing driveways and checking on neighbors, but tonight there was peace. We'd faced another test and passed it, not because of strict rules or rigid enforcement, but because we'd learned to take care of each other. The generator saga had taught me something important about community and conflict. Sometimes the people who opposed you weren't villains, just flawed humans operating under broken systems. When you changed the systems and gave people room to grow, remarkable transformations could happen. Linda had been a nightmare HOA president, but she'd also been capable of genuine change when confronted with the consequences of her actions. She'd almost died because of her own petty enforcement of rules that didn't matter, and that near-death experience had shocked her into reevaluating everything. I'd been prepared to let her suffer the consequences of her choices, but ultimately couldn't watch another human being freeze to death. That decision to help her, despite our history, had opened the door for healing and change that benefited the entire neighborhood. It wasn't a story with clear heroes and villains. We'd all made mistakes. We'd all learned. We'd all grown. And in the process, we'd built something worth having. A real community where people looked out for each other, where rules served people instead of the other way around, where conflicts were resolved through communication rather than punishment. As I headed to bed that night, I felt grateful for the whole messy experience. The blizzard, the dispute, the crisis, the transformation, all of it. because now I lived in a place that felt like home, surrounded by neighbors who felt like friends, participating in a community that actually functioned the way communities should. And my generator sat ready in the garage, maintained and fueled, waiting for the next emergency. But this time, if someone needed power, they'd ask, and I'd help, because that's what neighbors do.